Annick Lever BEM was born in November 1943 in Nazi-occupied France, a time of unimaginable danger for Jewish families. The daughter of a Jewish mother and a Catholic father, Annick's early years were marked by the hardships of the war and the horrors of the Holocaust. After being separated from her family and taken to prison with her mother, aunt and grandparents, Annick's life was forever changed by her father's heroic actions, which saved her and her baby cousin. Tragically, the rest of her family was deported to Auschwitz-Birkenau, where they perished. After the war, Annick was raised by a Catholic family in France, unaware of her Jewish heritage, until she was 17. She later moved to the UK, where she married, raised a family, and became a passionate advocate for Holocaust education. Today she joins us to share her extraordinary journey of survival, identity, and the deep personal loss that shaped her life. Annick, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us and for taking the time out to share this truly remarkable story. So let's start at the beginning. Now, we must note you were a baby at the very, very beginning, so obviously you won't have memory of what happened. But the story begins in Nazi-occupied France. Do you know what it was like, even anecdotally, in 1940, for your family, for friends? What was going on at that time?
Well, first of all, I should tell you that the family came from Paris, and in 39, summer of 39, they came down to the southwest of France, to the seaside there, a place called Royan. At the time, my aunt was 22 and my mother was 20. And I was always told that they were two very beautiful women, and they practiced what you call rhythmic ballet, but they were quite professional in it. My aunt had opened a little school there. My mother used to help her. They tried to establish themselves a little bit. They thought they were, first of all, coming merely on holidays. That's what we are told. Whether they really meant that or not, I don't know. And then war was declared. And my grandfather was the only one who was able to go back to Paris, to the apartment, and take with him whatever he could in the car. They then started to have all those, like the Nuremberg. I don't know if you ever heard of the Nuremberg laws, but in France it came, of course, a little bit later. And after having, curfews and the yellow stars and so on, they had to leave the coast. No Jews were allowed to live by the coast.
So at that time, Jews were now being discriminated against and kind of labelled, marked, pinpointed, so that everyone knew who was a Jew and who wasn't. They couldn't live in the coast. Where did they have to go?
They had to go inland.
And was it in a kind of ghetto format as well?
No. Everybody went off, in this area, because that part of France was occupied a bit later.
Right.
My father had an uncle who lived in a little village. It was about 35 kilometers from the coast, and the whole family ended up in that village. My parents lived with the aunt and uncle, and the grandparents were in rented accommodation, so was my aunt.
Were your father's family welcoming and accepting of your mother?
Oh, I think so. Oh,
Yeah.
yes. I think in that respect
There was no issue?
No, not as that I never heard.
Okay.
Not at all.
So in 1944, a few years on, the mood is very kind of discriminatory against Jews. But in 1944, your family is taken to a local prison to await to be deported. They didn't know where they were headed.
They didn't know what was ahead of them. No,
right. Did no one know? Was there no murmurings or whisperings?
When they were in that little village, their life became very difficult because my grandmother, I think, came from quite a well-to-do family in Holland. She actually was the first girl to go to university in Holland. Wow. And she spoke 7 languages. She could not accept what was going on. She found, I think she was one of the ones who found it the most difficult. Anyway, on the 30th of January 1944, the whole family was invited to spend the day at friends of my my parents in a town very close to where they were. And there my mother had a premonition that something was going to happen.
She felt it.
She felt it. And there was another friend of the family had been invited, and she asked the friend that if anything was to happen, would she look after me until they came back, because they didn't know what was ahead.
Got it.
And in another thing, maybe, the friend said, of course, of course I would, but please do not speak like that, because we are there to protect you, look after you. And they were all very good. People always talk about, and again, I saw a film yesterday, and the thing in Holland, a few people have. In France, I know there's a book, I don't know if you've ever heard of a woman called Simone Weil. She was very famous. She was a politician, very, very well known. And she wrote a book. She did the march, there. She survived with her sister, but her mother died on the march.
The Death March?
Yes.
Wow.
And this lady, I've got her book at home, wrote a book called My Life, and in it she says that people always criticize and people always say nobody helped, but she said nobody ever talked of the silent majority who helped everywhere, like people who saved me. Nobody talks about it. They were there.
That's interesting. There's a theory that evil and bad is very loud, but good is just quiet and gets on with it. They're not trying.
Exactly.
Yes,
absolutely.
So there were good people who cared, and of course you're alive.
Yeah. We were at this spending the day with those friends. That was the 30th of January 1944.
Mm-hmm.
They managed to get home, and when they arrived in the village, which is actually the village where I was born, the police was there waiting to arrest us.
They knew.
And my father managed to talk them, because it was all the French police. My father managed to talk them into leaving us at least for the night. And they agreed, but we were guarded. And what I could always hear when I could hear the story being told, that my mother put a lot of clothing on, because they were only allowed a little suitcase.
Yes.
So they put one dress on top of another, as much as they could put on themselves. And the next morning, we were all taken to the biggest town in the area, which is called La Rochelle. We were taken to a prison, which actually was a school. A school had been transformed into a prison.
Okay, so you're all in the prison. How does your dad and his friends smuggle you out?
What happened then, my father, who was not Jewish, they went to look into a few generations, couldn't find any Jewish blood. So he was able to go and went off to fetch the friends my mother had asked if they would look after me, who lived in another town, actually, which is the one where I grew up. And told them what had happened. I know that the arrival was, in a terrible state. And they went, 3 of them jumped into the car, went back to La Rochelle, to the prison we were taken to. They were able to get in. My father in those days got a bit of money, and you could, because we were guarded, I'm told, by French police.
So French fees over German soldiers
the Nazi were keeping,
They were there, but not
exactly. But it was
the French that allowed it.
Yes. So they managed to convince my aunt and my mother that they should let us baby go. And they agreed. And my cousin was wrapped up in her mother's shawls. I was wrapped up in blankets.
To hide you.
To hide, and they were very worried that I often heard that I would cry, but I didn't, obviously. But as that was happening, there was another lady prisoner there who heard what, she knew what was going on. So she came to the friends of my parents, and she said, I know what you're doing. you must take my children. And she had a little boy of 8 and a little girl of 5. And the friend said, I can't, those 2 babies, I've got their Catholic father out. I can't do that. And she said to her, if you had the heart of a mother, you would not say no. And what she didn't know is that the friend had lost a baby only a few months previously. A little boy was just of a year old of illness.
Yeah.
So of course she couldn't say no. So they walked out of the prison with those 2 children, with the and the 2 babies, and they went off to the town, it's called Saujon, where I grew up, to the friend's house.
So the friend, who we can refer to kind of as your mother, as in not your blood mother, but she raised you as a mother.
Yes, yes.
And you, as a baby, didn't know any different, and you just grew up with your life thinking this is your mum, but your dad was still present in your life. How did that work, and was there ever discussion? Why is she my mum? Why are you not together? What's going on?
I'll tell you something else. Is her husband then was around,
right. Yeah.
and I used to call him uncle. So I used to tell people that my mammy slept with my uncle. And of course, most people knew my stories. They didn't. But it was normal, and there was nothing wrong.
Yeah, and they're like, oh God.
Absolutely.
So your mum, your auntie, and cousins
Grandparents.
and grandparents, who were all in that La Rochelle prison, were then deported to Auschwitz.
Yes, what happened then, the same evening they took us back home, there was a knock at the door, and there was the police who told this lady, which I call mother, but now I refer to her as Mimi, because all the grandchildren called her Mimi. She's not with us anymore, but she was always referred to as Mimi.
Okay,
so
we'll call her Mimi from now on.
Exactly, because it made a difference with my
Absolutely, absolutely.
And Mimi opened the door, and there was to the police telling her that they knew that she had children that did not belong to her, and unless she brought them back, they had to arrest her. And she had another 2 children, a girl of 11 and a boy of 8. And it said they were allowed to keep the children for another 2 nights, and then they had to bring them back to La Rochelle, to the railway station. Otherwise,
so what happened?
So I know that the first night was very difficult. Nobody slept because the little boy was begging them not to take them back to the station, where everybody by then was already on the train. My family, those 2 children and the mother all survived. I met them. It was quite a story as well. Anyway, on the way, they never stopped the trains anywhere, but there on the way to the train was going to Paris, and from Paris they were being taken to one of the main camps in France, which was called Drancy. On the way there, they stopped the train at Poitiers, because this lady, the mother of those children, we don't know if it was true or not, pretending to be very, very ill.
Got it.
So they stopped the train, got her out with the children, and took her to hospital. When they were in the hospital, a priest came and said he could take the little boy with him, but he couldn't take the little girl because she was too small. And that's what he did. And the mother eventually and the little girl were taken to what one called a camp of the slow death, because the father was a prisoner of war already, which meant it was not an extermination camp, but they let them die of illnesses. But they survived. And they found each other afterwards back in Paris at their apartment, the father, the 2 children, and I knew them very, very well after the war. In fact, they were very grateful to Mimi to have tried to help, and they were tailors. So when I got engaged, they made my outfits. So they were really, they were
what a lovely full circle moment. Wow, that's an amazing story of survival.
Yeah.
Can you just speak about, I guess, you know, we, as a younger generation, I understand and know about Auschwitz, but knowing that your own mother was there, how have you computed that loss?
Well, that's, I should carry on telling you really the
Please do,
story
please
that
do.
you would say. So eventually they were all taken, after the train was stopped in Poitiers, they all were taken to Drancy, to that camp. And then I think they must have arrived in Drancy on the 3rd of February 44. And then on the 10th of February 1944, they were all put on cattle transport to go to Auschwitz. I never knew really what had happened to my mother, because all the official papers used to say that she was presumed dead, but nobody knew. And I could hear sometimes that they say maybe, she could come back. But as for the grandparents and my aunt, their names was listed in Auschwitz. The Nazis were very, very good in keeping records, and their name was there, but not my mother's name. And we found that strange. It is now, but for a long time it wasn't. But what happened, and I don't know if that's the reason, but after the war, there was a lady who traveled in the same transport of my family, which was transport 68. She came back, she was from Paris, and she obviously had spoken to the family and was looking for that member of our family, because my grandfather had quite few brothers and sisters who were also in Paris. And she found a cousin, and she told him then that she had traveled with them. She survived Auschwitz, this lady, of course. That was after the liberation. She had traveled with the family, and that one of the sisters had been shot on the way to Auschwitz. And that was my mother.
She didn't make it to Auschwitz.
By difference, when they all arrived there, they were taken straight to the gas chambers. So.
Did she ever say why she was shot?
No. What we assumed was, as you know, I was 2 months and she was breastfeeding me. And they think that she had a milk fever. And milk fever can make you very, very bad. I know that for sure as well, because I had official papers who says that if my mother agreed to go into hospital with me when they were in La Rochelle, she could be taken, but she didn't want to. So
I have a practical question. I don't know if you know the answer. I breastfeed my children. How did Mimi look after you?
Well, that's another story.
Because my daughter wouldn't just take a bottle from another woman.
Neither would I.
Right, so what happened?
So what happened when my sister, I was, the day they brought us back there to Mimi's house in Sojo, I see my sister and her daughter was sent straight to a pharmacy to buy a bottle and powdered milk. But apparently I refused. They just could not feed me. They had to find a wet nurse.
Really?
There was somebody around, and I had a wet nurse to start with. So,
gosh, but how amazing were they to look after
Mimi
you?
was wonderful.
Mimi
was
wonderful.
really, really wonderful.
Okay, so when did you learn about your heritage and who you are and everything? Because you were, you've grown up with a Catholic family.
Yes, you should know, which I think is part of this. Well, my father was in the resistance, and in the underground.
Yeah.
And he had false identity cards made for my mother and my aunt, and he had bribed somebody at the prison to leave a door open, and they did. They went out.
Your mom and your sister left?
The two sisters left, but when they were outside, they felt they could not leave their parents. So they chose to come back. My cousin, who was still alive, said to that day, how could they choose to go back to their parents instead
of life,
of coming to their children? But you know, at the time, all they could say, I think
And they didn't know what was coming.
they didn't know what was ahead of them. You have to be fair with them.
Oh, 100%. It's all very well in hindsight, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh God, but that's such a horrible thought.
Think that they were outside, they could have been freed, and they choose not to.
Awful. So you grew up Catholic.
Yes, yes.
Were you a kind of a religious Catholic?
No, well,
Or practicing Catholic?
up to 12 years old.
And did it ever feel like this doesn't feel like, did it bring anything up for you? Did you question anything? Or you're
No.
if you don't a child, but you were.
My father was kind
Of course.
The odd thing is, I was always told my grandmother paternal wanted him to be a priest. And he ended up marrying a
Jewish girl.
So, you know, a bit odd. His mother was not alive anymore when he got married. You know, it was just normal.
Right.
I had communion. No, it was just
What you did in day-to-day life.
Yeah.
Why do you think Mimi never mentioned anything after the war was done?
It was for my father to say, and really, you know, my father was 38 when he got married. He wouldn't marry before when his mother was alive. He was married just for 2 years.
Oh. And how old were you when you learnt all this information?
17.
He waited till you were 17
Before I went to Holland.
And why were you going to Holland?
My mother had 2 sisters.
Yes.
At the time war was declared, this aunt was living in Amsterdam, married a Dutchman, and had 2 children. I had a cousin, a boy there, who was 8, and his sister was actually, at the time war was declared, she was 3. As I say, they live in Amsterdam, and you know Holland was very, very bad.
Famously.
Exactly. They were, one night, there was a knock at the door of the apartment. The uncle went to open the door, and there stood 3 Nazi soldiers who were coming to arrest them, to take them away. My uncle said to the one in charge, to the officer, please, come with me first. I want to show you something. And the chap agreed. Went with my uncle, who took him to my cousin, the little girl, Ellen was her name, a bedroom. And he opened the door, and she was fast asleep, sucking her thumb. She had curly blonde hair. And the officer said to my uncle, I have a little girl just like that at home. We're coming back for you tomorrow. And she always says she saved the family, but in a way...
So they left?
So they left. I mean, it was, you know...
Let's get out.
It was so very bad one, but some of them were made to do what they were doing. So they left, and as soon as they left...
Where did they go?
Well, that's where my uncle as well, a lot of members of the family, I found out in Amsterdam, was part of the underground.
Right.
Very active in there. So as soon as they left, he was able to get in touch with members of the underground resistance. And they came to fetch the children. The little girl was left in Amsterdam. She... all through the war, she was supposed to be the twin of another little girl, a family where I think the gentleman was a professor.
Got it.
And they looked after her through the war.
As you keep saying, like, they're amazing people, always trying to help.
People who never talked about it afterwards.
Yes.
That's the point. The boy who, you know, that Hitler wanted everybody to have white skin, blue eyes,
blonde hair.
My cousin's was blue. He was white, blue eyes, but dark hair.
Ooh.
So they tried to bleach his hair, and he often said that all through the war he lived with red hair. They didn't manage. They didn't have the right product.
It's very hard to get colour right. All good colourists will tell you that.
Anyway, they took him. He was taken to the north of Holland. He was put in on a farm, looked after on a farm, and then the Nazi arrived. He managed to escape in the forest, which was not too far. And he was at the time he was only 8. He lived in the forest several days on his own, and then he was found members of the resistance, and he was brought to another village, and a family of bakers who themselves, I think, had 3 much older boys, looked
Took him in.
after him, and they treated him wonderfully all through the war, to the extent that he actually was, he became quite a successful businessman after the war, and at one point he was always in touch with those people. He could,
Looked after him.
Oh,
Yeah.
their bakery burned, so he paid for them to have a brand new bakery, and he said it was the least he
Yeah,
could
exactly.
do.
They saved his life.
Absolutely.
It gives me chills. I have an 8-year-old son, thinking of him having to fend for himself.
Can you imagine?
No, I actually can't. Like, talk about made of different stuff, having to survive. It's just remarkable.
My uncle had a contact, somebody who lived in the same street where Anne Frank was hiding. And he went to that person. I've got in touch with him. I don't know exactly, but the aunt and uncle lived for 2 years under a staircase, just sitting. They couldn't move. They used to go into the garden in the evening, but otherwise, they just sat and they couldn't do. And my aunt lost all her hair through that. Because no fresh air, but it grew again afterward. But they survived.
They survived.
So,
okay, so why did you go to? How did you know about this family in Amsterdam to then go there?
I got a letter when I was about 17 from Holland. They wanted to know me. I mean, there had been some sort of inheritance. They managed to get the address, and that's how I was contacted. And when I went to Holland, I arrived there flying for the first time on my own, in those days.
Yeah.
I'm talking of a very long time. The boy was married by that time. In fact, his wife worked for KLM, and she came to fetch me on the plane. And anyway, the aunt and uncle were there. And it was very strange. When I arrived, I didn't know them at all, but I felt at home. I felt there was something, I can't explain it, because I was always told that I was different. But what they meant by that, I don't know. I was quite strong character, and what I wanted to do, I did. I must ask my sister, who was still alive, why did they always say I was different? Anyway, when I arrived in Holland, I felt I belonged. And the other oddity for me was they were not religious anymore. You can imagine. They had seen, but Jewish people are very traditional. Traditional.
Yeah, traditional. And so like on a Friday night lighting candles. Yeah.
Exactly.
It's not about religion, it's about tradition.
Food.
Yeah.
So Friday night, my aunt, when I had arrived, I think it must have arrived on the Wednesday or something. Friday night, she prepared a Shabbat meal, and my cousin Jacques was his name, and his wife came, and she served me with that beautiful chicken soup.
Good for the soul.
It smells so good, but I couldn't eat it.
Why?
I was brought up as a Catholic.
And you don't eat chicken soup?
And in France, although France is a secular country, even in schools in those days, I don't know what it's like now, you never were given meat on a Friday.
Oh, God.
Which is strange because it's secular. So at 17,
you couldn't do it.
I had never eaten meat on a Friday, and I'm given that. What do? I took my spoon and started, and it was so delicious. I ate the spoon.
You're like, I'll let this thing go now. Yeah.
Exactly.
Anyway, now you're not fully Catholic, you're half, so you can do all the things.
Now I realize, I start to realize things are different.
Okay, so to end, because we could keep you all day, but you've given us so much of your time. You spent so much of your life educating younger generations on the Holocaust and keeping them informed about what happened in the past to ensure that it never happens again. What do you think the most important lesson for this younger generation is, and what can they take with you? Them, rather.
When I speak to the young people, the thing always say, and I insist that I brought up my children like that, you have to learn to respect everybody. It doesn't matter the color of your skin. It doesn't matter what religion you believe in. We are all humans beings, and we must learn to respect everyone. And I always tell them that. And I believe in that very, very strongly.
You know, that was a time of such hatred, and it just doesn't work to live in a world of hate. It's just,
you have to learn to, you must never forget, because it's like right now, we must never forget what has happened. And you can't change the past, but the only thing you can do is look ahead and, make it all a better world eventually.
absolutely.
And, those young people are there. That's something I would love to tell you.
Please.
The family in Holland decided that I should not stay in the area where I grew up. There were too many bad memories. So I stayed with them several months. Then I went back to France to Mimi, and ended up, I was working in a children's hospital. I wanted to be a nurse for baby anyway. And I got another letter from them. And that letter said that they thought that, I should leave the area. They had found me a family to come as an au pair. Or maybe you have it, no, in England.
Oh, yes.
And I ended up, just, I was not yet 19, and then left everything again.
Wow.
Ended up in this Jewish, they purposely chose a Jewish family to teach me Jewish way of life. I had no idea.
And you were very receptive to their advice?
Yeah, because when I went with them, I liked the way they live. It was quite different. With Mimi, I had love and food and everything, but the family in Holland, it was another way of life.
Right.
I think I liked that.
And you were a young girl.
And I was into the adventure and so on. I was nervous because my English was never brilliant. I was going off to England. They wanted me also to be able to perfect my English, which isn't, but still.
It is. You're brilliant. You're wonderful.
But the point is, they took it very much to heart, this family there, to teach me which Jewish way of life. And I arrived there at the end of August. And the beginning of September was one of the most important Jewish
Rosh Hashanah, the New Year.
Exactly. And they took me to the synagogue. First time in my life.
Wow.
I had never been to a synagogue, because in Holland they didn't go anymore. They didn't. So,
So you learned a whole new religion again.
Yeah, I never was that religious. I was sort of accepted, but I mean, I can't say the prayers or anything like that.
But do you feel like you're dual, Catholic and Jewish?
Yes, I mean, I don't know. It was strange. Suddenly I knew that there was something I had to know. But the reason I want to tell you all of that, which was, I think, very amusing in a way, is they take me to the synagogue for Rosh Hashanah, and in Bristol is one of the oldest in the country, and it's an Orthodox synagogue, which means men and women do not mix. The men sit downstairs, and they have a balcony at the top. So I'm there at the balcony looking everywhere, and comes a friend of the family. I'm sitting, with my family. They had 2 girls, and this girl said to me, "Look down there is a boy." And I look down, and he looks up, and that is now my husband for 57 years. I had never been into a synagogue, and as I met my husband. I thought I have to tell you that part of the story.
That's not amusing, that's gorgeous. So you literally arrived in England, go to synagogue. On the Jewish New Year, you look at your husband, and your future husband.
Yeah, well, I didn't know at the time, of course, because,
Oh, that's a good story, Annick. Thank you. We're going to have to leave it there, I think. You know what, reflecting on the theme of this year's Holocaust Memorial Day, which was for a better future. And I feel like you obviously lived that life. You always looked ahead, and you made a wonderful future for yourself as a young girl and you're spreading your story and your word and educating the future generation. So thank you so much for all the work you do. Annick, your story is one of courage, resilience, and remembrance. Through loss, you've built a life of purpose, ensuring the lessons of the Holocaust are never forgotten. Thank you so much for sharing your journey and inspiring all of us here at Shiva.
Thank you for asking me, because you are quite right. People have to know about it. Not my story in particular, but people must not forget. Never, never forget what has happened. Thank you.
Thank you.